Okay, so something that I like to talk about is, I guess, humanizing the climate language or like humanizing action. And something I believe is missing a lot from the conversation around, like, oh, we have to, about mobilizing people for climate change is it's very doomsday, right? It's very like, hey, if we don't do this in the next 10 years, we're all gonna collapse and die. If we don't do this, tomorrow we're all gonna persevere and we're all gonna sweat until we like boil out. I don't know, I'm just making up things, but like that's the kind of the energy. And I think that human beings at some point fear, we get numbed out by fear, right? Like you can only push people so far, and at some point, like they're not gonna respond because they're numb to it. So what I like to talk about is how do we bring back the feeling of love into the conversation? How do we change the perception from like, hey, we have to like work hard to fix this thing, but like rather switch it up and like, how do we fall back in love with nature? How do we fall back in love with our environment? And how do we use love as a driver of action instead of fear? And that's something I bring a lot in like my work and my art. Um, the most recent piece I did with regards to this was called Omi, where I personified water. And I was like, if water was a human being, how would they present themselves? Would they be like a beautiful lady or a beautiful man? Would they be non binary? And if that's the case, like, would we relate to water differently? Would we be able to see water like with more compassion, for instance, then that implicate how we relate to water. So like, do we pay attention when we're drinking water? Do we understand how it feels? Do we appreciate the way it quenches our thirst? Little things like that. I believe we need to kind of start adding to the conversation to allow people to relate with nature in ways that I think will allow them to take action more seriously, because people will do the most absurd things for the things they love, right? We hear all these crazy things about people going above and beyond for people they love, for things they love. And so how do we shift the language to kind of involve that? And yeah.
Super interesting perspective. Can I ask two questions? One is, how did you get to the point where you were considering nature and art in those terms, in that way? Because that's not a natural place for lots of people, and I'm sure lots of people wouldn't consider water in those terms or nature in those terms. So maybe just a bit on your journey. And also then on some of the reactions, how they reacted when you present the art in this way.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say what really brought me there was my own, I want to say, mental wellness, spiritual journey. And the more I kind of started reconnecting with myself as a human being, the more I started appreciating the things that make me thrive as a human being. And so that's the access to clean air, because without clean air, I don't have enough oxygen in my lungs to be able to perform at the capacity that I need to. Without access to water, I'm not able to perform in those very real ways. So when I started seeing myself, I think, with more compassion, then I started being aware of like the things that allow me to thrive. And because I'm a visual artist, then I was able to express that through my art, hence this. And the reaction I got was actually people are like, oh wow, this is very interesting, and it's a good perspective to try and start working with water in this ways and nature. And I know you've had a similar traction trajectory with like when it comes to nature and money, and how people relate with like finance and this whole like topic of like financing and nature.
Yeah, sure. I'm talking about a couple of campaigns that I've worked on. So there's Global Citizen, which I'm currently working on, but for the last 5 years before that, I worked on a campaign in the UK called Make My Money Matter, which is all about helping people understand the links between their money and climate change. Most people, when they think about climate action, think about the food we eat, how we travel, the clothes we wear, but very few people thought about the links between their money, the money in their pensions, or their bank accounts, or their savings, or their investments, the role that does that in the world. And actually, we run a campaign to highlight sometimes the accidental contradictions between our lifestyle choices and our money. So you'd have examples of vegetarians who are invested in the meat industry, you'd have doctors invested in tobacco, and you'd have climate campaigners in the room who will be invested in the fossil fuel companies they are campaigning against through their 401ks or their pensions or their savings. And so, whilst you used a lot of love in your storytelling, we've also used a bit of discomfort and humour to try and highlight those accidental contradictions. Because while absolutely you want to show love and compassion, I think making people feel a little more comfortable about the realities about what's going on around them, shake them a little bit with that knowledge, give them some support in taking actions and change things. I think that's an important element of communications as well that we've worked on. And so we've used, in addition to telling these stories, we've mobilised different actors, not being actors in the literal sense. So we've had a couple of stars from Game of Thrones trying to communicate these issues to audiences in the UK. We've had Olivia Colman, an award-winning, Oscar-winning actor who's brilliant, personifying the issue to UK citizens, UK states. And what we found, again, is in addition to the humour, meeting people where they are, which is entertainment, activists, artists, musicians, actors, nurses, spokespeople, communicators, and using the channels that people normally access their information on to integrate into their lives is really effective at communicating with people, rather than just using maybe the typical climate language or the climate spokesman.
Very, very interesting. I love when you talk about that you used humor. Um, if it's okay with the organizers, if I can ask the audience another question and hopefully somebody can answer. But would anybody be open to telling us how they came into how the climate issue awareness was brought to their attention, whether it's through school or social media? Anybody volunteer to like share with us? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. And actually, it was my 9-year-old niece. The birthday one was just visiting my she came one day to him and she said in a very crying voice that, hey, but the way you're doing this line for us, that we want air for us. That it will be hard. And that gave rise to whatever I'm doing with her. She just said, look, this here.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, young people do have a way of like bringing some of this information to our fold. If it's okay, I'm going to read a tweet that I actually stumbled upon. I hope you find it as funny as I did. I thought it was really hilarious, but it's okay if you don't find it funny. I won't blame you because I thought it was hilarious. So there was a tweet that said, bro, why is summer and winter arguing over custody right now? So if you're in the United States, you would understand that like it's pretty warm for November. It's like pretty hot. So and then in the comments, somebody responded and said, in the case of 11-month-old Novembra Jenkins, climate change, you are the father. Like, I thought it was really hilarious because that's the humor. Like, that is the truth, right? Why is summer and winter arguing over the custody of like who is going to take space? And then somebody in the comments was like, actually, you're the father. And this is very it's in it was a ploy on a very popular show. I think it's called not Dr. Phil. I forgotten the show. It's like a custody show where people come on the television and they have issues with who the custody of the child is. Like if the father, then they go testing and then they air it loud, and it's like very dramatic. Like so very dramatic, and it's very popular in the United States. But like I thought it was very interesting that now people are actually using these pop culture references and entertainment to kind of bring into focus this very real issue. And while I thought it was really funny, to me it was like, okay, so the message is actually getting across somewhat. It would be different if somebody commented there and was like, yeah, well, we need to take our NDCs more seriously. I don't think it would have had the same impact versus like in the case of Novembria Jenkins, like climate change, you're the father. Like I thought that was hilarious, but maybe people here didn't find it, but I really thought it was funny. But it was just like a point to what you're saying in terms of like the power of entertainment and satire in like also like helping people digest this information.
Sure, and I think that there's two ends to this. 'Cause I think the top-down entertainment, don't look up big festivals like Global Citizen Run in Central Park every year with Coldplay and Ed Sheeran talking about these issues. You need that like air cover from big celebrities to make some noise from the film industry, from media, from artists, from musicians. You really need that, and that's really, really valuable. But I think to the point that gentleman made as well, what makes it really real is human stories. Human beings who are affected by this day in, day out on a one-to-one individual level. It's all very well and good. Big rock stars and international performers talking about this. That's brilliant. You get that awareness out there. But what I think really resonates and connects with individuals, changes lives, changes behaviors, changes patterns, is those more personal stories. And I think that's something that we can often lack in these forums as well. And I think the COP and climate movement in general is doing much better at integrating those stories. But we too often get stuck in conversations about an NBC or an NCPG or a variety of other acronyms. And what is missing is the real life implications of people around the world, and the more we can centre and vocalise those stories, I think the more powerful that is. I'm sure, I mean, you were in Cali last month, a few weeks ago maybe, and was that your experience over there, that there was better communication, better storytelling, better voices?
Yes. So, for those who don't know about COP, the Biodiversity Conference, which is the equivalent of this, but for nature and biodiversity loss, happened just a few weeks ago in Cali, Colombia, and I was very fortunate and grateful to be a part of that conference as a We Are Family Foundation youth delegate. And in Cali, I was one thing I really appreciated about what the Colombian government did is like the green zone. They made it very local and very, they broke it down to, they met the people where they were, right? Because they had this international convention, which in very many situations can feel very alienated from like what the local communities and populations are going to have access to. And so what the government did is that they had the green zone in like a very public park, and they had very intentional programming. And an example of that was they brought like they had a free salsa show behind a very famous church, and people could sit down with their kids, and it was nice and family friendly affair. And then immediately after the salsa show, they showcased this film that was kind of breaking down what like biodiversity loss means to like the future of like their kids and the young people. I'm just kind of like relating to the story you mentioned, you know, how like your niece brought you in. So they kind of showed that parallel, but it was an animated film that was also accessible to young children. So it was something that was very family friendly, kind of calm, and with very in alignment with like the culture in Colombia. So they really decentralized how they were passing on the information and the importance of what was happening in their country, in their city, in their space at that moment and time, which I thought was really, really brilliant and cool. And I think that, you know, a lot more, I want to say a lot more people should actually learn from like the strategy that the Colombian government did in trying in really hosting like COP 16 this year. It was very well done. Yeah.
And can I ask, we were talking earlier about your experience in Kenya and protecting the tropical forest there. I would really be interested in your experiences and insights into effective communications about mobilizing different stakeholders, be that
Yeah.
indigenous communities, but also the other people who are going to have to be involved to protect that land and your story there.
Yeah. So my community is very, it's not unique, but I if I go to my community and I'm like, hey, this is how we can contribute to the NDCs, they're gonna look at me like, we don't know what you're talking about, right? Especially in consideration of the fact that my community has been indigenous to the forest we protect, which is called Kayam Sokara, for the last hundreds of years, since we settled there from like 1600 AD, and we have been the inhabitants of that particular space and forest. So to them, conservation is actually a way of life. It's more spiritual. Our forests, we believe our ancestors live in the forest. And so in communicating about like how can we conserve that, it becomes a little tricky considering that majority of the population doesn't really follow the indigenous way. It's only like a subset of us. So the language that I have to use is more economic. Why? Because they're one of the most impoverished communities in my country, and to them they're hungry. So when they see the forest, they see it as an income source. They see like cutting down the tree as a way to feed their family. So I cannot come and tell them like, hey, this is how we contribute to NDCs. What does NDC have to do with my stomach? So the way I go to them is like, hey, we can actually make money with the forest being alive. Look at all these wild castor plants that we have in the forest. There's an opportunity for us to monetize this ingredient, which is very popular in main markets for the cosmetic industry and also like the car lubricant industry. A lot of car lubricants actually use castor oil as a base and biodiesel. So there are other ways in which we can actually harvest the forest while it's still alive and conserve it. And so that way I've been able to shift the dialogue around conservation and be able to get people along, because to them they're seeing this, okay, we can actually use this as a way, like conservation can be a way to feed my family. So this is the way that I had to really understand who I am talking to and who I'm trying to work with, and how do I make their situation better so that we can address the root cause of deforestation at the core of it. Yeah.
That's super interesting. I think it's another kind of core tenet of what I encourage people to think about in communicating these issues. It's meeting people where they are. It's not coming with our perceptions or our priorities or, at Global Citizen Voice that is what we need is NDCs, what we need is NCQG, what we need is ambition and action. That's not the language that many people are talking,
No.
and that's not the prioritization. And there is overlap, and there is commonality there, but you can't be lazy and just use your language, your friendly. You have to meet people where they are. So I think we're going to need to wrap up in a minute, but maybe we just do a couple of reflections on key messages and principles should encourage everyone to think about over the next week or two whilst they're at home.
Yeah. I think my message to everybody and like my reflection is, let's humanize this as much as possible, because the world, we're human beings. The planet is alive. The planet is not yet dead. And so I think we need to really relate to it with more compassion, more love, more humanity. And let's see ourselves in each other and see ourselves in nature, which sometimes can become a little hard, but that's my reflection. Just kind of like, let's make it a little bit more human and less rigid and scientific. It doesn't mean that we're taking away the gravity of the situation. I think we all understand the gravity of the situation. So what do we do about that? And I think humanizing ourselves in the process is a huge step towards that direction.
Great, thank you. And the last thing I say is that I think, as I started on, which is the power of bringing other people into rooms like this, and by other people I mean civil society, the public in who represent and come from, and the importance of having that public mobilization, that engagement, storytelling, communication for climate change, because it's going to be on the back of that public action that the really important work that everyone in this room is doing over the next couple of weeks will A, be achieved, and then B, more importantly, be delivered. Whatever we say and agree here won't be able to be implemented if there's not the public constituents to support all around the world who buy in and want this stuff to happen. And so good communications, good engagement, good storytelling is absolutely fundamental to ensure that we can deliver on the great stuff happening over the next couple of weeks. So I think that's us.